So I wanted to take this video as a chance for us to review the joints, which are also known as articulations, and that's going to kind of wrap up our chapter 5 content. So we will spend a little bit of time talking about two classification methods of the joints, and then we'll finish off by having a look of a few disorders that are related as well. So whether we're talking about joints or articulations, what we're really talking about is looking at sites where two or more bones come together and meet. And I can really think of two main functions for the joints. First of all, joints do allow for mobility. So, for example, we end up seeing many muscles running over the joints. So typically muscles attach on two different bones, and it is that joint that they cross that they can then manipulate the angle of that region. In addition, of course, joints play an important role in holding the skeleton together. Otherwise, a skeleton would very much collapse. And like I mentioned earlier on at the intro, we have two ways of really classifying the joints. So the first of these is going to be classifying joints based on their structure, and we'll spend the bulk of the time today on that. And then we'll look at also the classification based on the function of the joints. So when we classify joints by structure, there's really three subtypes or subcategories of joints that I want us to focus on. We'll talk about fibrous joints, we'll talk about cartilaginous joints, and we'll also talk about synovial joints. So let's start with the fibrous joints. In fibrous joints, the bones are united by fibrous tissue, and there's really three main types of fibrous joints. The first of these is sutures. Sutures are immovable joints, and they are found only in the skull. So last week when we had a look of those bones of the skull, and we saw that they had very ragged edges. Those ragged edges actually fit very nicely together, forming these interlocked bone edges that then come together, forming a strong immovable joint. We will also find very short interconnecting fibers present in these joints. Next that I wanted to talk about is our syndesmoses. Syndesmoses are ligaments. They allow more movement than sutures, but still are somewhat immovable. And there's two main sites where we will find these syndesmoses. First example that I have here is the distal ends of tibia and fibula. And the second example you can see underneath the heading for this slide, and that's illustrating us where we're forming two compartments of the two sides of the bones of the forearms. So in a way, it forms that boundary for the muscles that we'll get to review then, especially the flexors and extensors. Third fibrous joint type that I wanted to talk about is our gomphoses. These are again immobile joints. Actually, the word comes from a Greek word for nail or a bolt. And these are very much like peg in a socket kind of joints. And the example that I provided here is where the teeth meet the facial bones and form that nice socket where the teeth can anchor that we're seeing there. So next structural classification that I want us to spend a little bit of time is looking at the cartilaginous joints. And there's really two main subtypes that we're going to be able to see here. So synchondroses are immobile joints, and two examples that I provided here are the epiphyseal plates of the growing long bones. So when we revised the long bones and we saw that that's at the epiphyseal plates where the lengthwise growth has taken place, that would be the area that we're seeing in this example. I also have highlighted an example where the first rib and the manubrium of the sternum come together. That would be another good example of synchondroses. The next example that I wanted to talk about is our symphyses. And symphyses are slightly movable joints. The two examples that I provided here is the pubic symphysis, so the connection that holds the hip bones together. And you remember we discussed earlier on when the female goes into the labor, and that joint can separate then in order to facilitate the delivery of the baby. And then we see the intervertebral joints or intervertebral discs as well as an example of symphysis. So the last structural classification that we have left to consider is going to be our synovial joints. And synovial joints enable a large range of movement. I think shoulder and hip joints would be very good examples of those. And these are bones that come together, but they are separated by a joint cavity. And within that cavity, we will end up finding synovial fluid. And in the Canvas course, I have provided you a rather nice diagram that I draw on a kind of time-lapse manner, highlighting the key parts of the synovial joints. So I encourage you to look at that underneath this video, I assume. So that might be a useful one for you to review when you're getting familiar with the parts of the synovial joints. And I also wanted to discuss about the 6 different types of synovial joints that we can find. And these are really based on the shape of the articular surface, but also the movement that this joint is capable of. So let's review those 6 quickly. So in plane joints, we really see these two structures just gliding over each other. So that does allow us a fairly large range of movement, but of course that's limited by those two planes and how they come together. Hinge joints then are literally like hinges. You can think of, for example, door hinge as this example that we're seeing here. And this allows a range of movement. That range of movement is, however, limited to what axis it will take place on. I also wanted to talk briefly about pivot joints. And in pivot joints, we're seeing that the ends of this joint are held still, but they still rotate. So we're seeing a special type of joint here. Our condylar joints instead appear almost like socket. It's not quite the ball and socket fit, but it is a socket-like depression where these bones come together. Second last one that I wanted to talk about is our saddle joints. So saddle joints sit and fit well together. They do not provide, however, unlimited movement. So there is some restriction to the amount of movement that we're able to see here. And I believe our last of the different types of synovial joints that I wanted to review is, of course, our ball and socket joints. These provide a great fit and a huge range of movement that we're able to see. So very much of an interest for us to look at. Here I also have provided you a diagram of some of the most important types of synovial joints. I believe that this diagram is also available for you on your learning materials if you find it useful. And now that we've had a look of the structural classification of different kinds of joints, it's a good time for us to shift our attention to talk about functional classification of joints. So let's spend a little bit of time just going through that quickly, and we can look at joints based on their range of movement that's possible. And really the 3 different types that we're going to be able to see here are going to be our immovable, slightly movable, and completely freely movable joints in terms of the functional classification. And finally, I wanted to finish by mentioning a few disorders of joints, and most of these are examples of inflammatory ones. So we see bursitis, which is the inflammation of the bursa, and you'll get to learn about bursa when you look at that recording again of that synovial joint that I provided for you in your materials. We can also have various different kinds of sprains where the ligaments, so these are the bone-to-bone connections, get either pulled or they get torn. And finally, the group that I wanted to finish off with is talking about arthritis. So these are inflammation of the joint, and there's many different kinds. So OA, our osteoarthritis, is kind of a wear and tear typical type of a joint disorder that affects really at any age of an individual with too much use of that joint. And I often see these, for example, in runners and knees of the runners. So that's something that we can see. We also see RA, so rheumatoid arthritis, which is an autoimmune disease where your own body attacks the joints. And this is especially characteristic for younger females. And the final one that I've mentioned here is going to be our gout. This is the formation of the crystals at the joint, especially in males in their 30s or 40s. And that really brings us to the end of this quick review of the joints. And I think that that wraps up our skeletal system discussion. I appreciate your good work, and I look forward to interacting you either in the class or in discussion forums or online spaces. Thank you for joining me. Bye.